continuing the Sutta study on the Upakkilesasutta with our guest teacher, Ajahn Brahmavara.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, they can.
Thank you. So we're doing the same sutta as last week, Sutta 128, Upakkilesasutta. Page, I'm not sure what page in your books, different books.
It's page 1008.
1008 in Bhikkhu Bodhi's Majjhima Nikaya. And we got about halfway through last week, and I'd just like to begin with a short recap, and then we'll continue. So just to remind those who were here last week, the sutta begins in Kosambi, where the monks are quarreling, attacking one another with verbal daggers. And the Buddha tries to intervene, and they don't want to hear from him. So they more or less ask him to leave them alone. And I should mention that the quarrel eventually fizzles out and peace returns to the monks of Kosambi. In different places in the Pali Canon, we can learn about this. And the primary reason why the quarrel was quite swiftly resolved in the end was that the lay people got fed up and just decided not to give alms anymore to the monks. So that helped them to, just to sort of come around and and make amends over a very small matter. It was a very small matter, but small matters can sometimes have great significance, can't they? And we can really get caught up in the small things, the small details of life. Anyway, the Buddha left Kosambi, and he just decided the next day, or he left the next day, and he went to visit 3 monks who were practicing together in Gosita's Park, close by, and Anuruddha, Kimbila, and what's the other one called? Nandia. And there's this wonderful, as you'll recall, those who were here last week, this wonderful kind of contrast between the monks of Kosambi having their difficulties and these 3 monks who are living together. And the Buddha says, like, are you blending together like milk and water? And, how are you? He comes and asks them how they're doing. And they say, yes, Lord, we are blending together like milk and water. And the Buddha asks them, how is that so? How do you manage that? And I'd like to read through again, just briefly, their first responses, and then we'll continue with the rest of their responses. So first of all, they made the Buddha very welcome. Got him a seat, and he could wash his feet and settle down and be comfortable with them. And he said, Anuruddha spoke for the other 2. And he said, Sir, I think I'm fortunate, so very fortunate, to live together with spiritual companions such as these. So his expression of gratitude. And then he goes on, I consistently treat these venerables with kindness by way of body, speech, and mind, both in public and in private. So this wonderful encouragement to practice metta in every way, in every situation, in relation to others. And I think probably it starts with the metta in relation to ourselves. So this extraordinary goodwill body, goodwill of speech, and goodwill even in the way we think about our companions, our family, or our community, both in public and in private. So whether we're on our own or we're together or we're out somewhere, in every situation, how to be harmonious. And then he goes on, and this is my favorite. I mean, this is really, to me, the key to harmony, world peace and harmony. Why don't I set aside my own ideas and just go along with these venerables' ideas? So I think that's very powerful. And elsewhere, the Buddha said that our views and opinions can be the cause of all the strife and turmoil, pain and suffering in this world. But I won't go on because I said things about that last time. So to read now from the text, the Venerables Nandia and Kimbala spoke likewise, and they added, "This is how we live in harmony, appreciating each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindly eyes." Good, good, Anuruddha and friends, said the Buddha. But I hope you're living diligently, keen and resolute. Indeed so, we all live diligently. But how do you live in this way? In this case, sir, whoever returns first from the alms round, prepares the seats, and puts out the drinking water and the rubbish bin. If there's anything left over, whoever returns last eats it if they like. Otherwise, they throw it out where there's little that grows, or drop it into water that has no living creatures. Then they put away the seats, drinking water and rubbish bin, and sweep the refectory. So basically, it's like the practical consideration and the sort of dance that we find we do in community when we're all hoping to support one another and are living together harmoniously. So looking out for things that might have not got done, or if you're the first in the room to do what needs to be done, and if you're the last one out to, take care of whatever, the lights or the windows. And so very down to earth, very practical, but kind of helpful to consider how this can relate to our own lives. And I think of things like the washing up. In families, often it's not a very popular chore. And, people will try and not do it. And then the people who do it start to feel a bit put upon, a bit fed up, a bit martyred. And then they might stop doing it. And then the dishes may pile up. And everyone gets depressed and fed up and angry with each other. And it's very quick, isn't it? It's very easy for these things to happen. That's just one example. But this can happen in so many ways around the kind of tasks that we see as perhaps mundane, perhaps not so important as my letter writing or my office work or my career or whatever. And yet it's these tasks that kind of really support us from the grass roots, from the ground up. And so for harmony, isn't it just the case, just as they're describing, if everybody's looking out to see what needs to be done and is willing just to pitch in and help, then everyone can feel motivated, enthusiastic, and respect one another. So much food for thought in these simple phrases. And, they're talking about how it is day to day. So again, he goes on. If someone sees that the pot of water for washing, drinking, or the toilet is empty, they set it up. And this is quite interesting, just because the quarrel that happened in Kosambi was about somebody leaving the water pot in the toilet half empty or half full, or I can't quite remember, but not quite right. And so these three are impeccable in their looking out for setting things up for the next person in a way that they can appreciate. And he goes on, if one can't do it, if the water's not available, we summon another with a wave of the hand and set it up by lifting with their hands. So they carry the water from place to place, presumably from a well or the old-fashioned way. And so they signal to one another, and no speech is required. We just do the job. And I think that's very interesting, because there's a subtlety there, isn't there? You know, just a subtle gesture, and it's noticed by the others. And so that sense of really tuning in to one another, to the body language. And I can see that there's a lot we could say about this. I won't say too much, but how we can observe one another, even in silence, and just, we can be checking, just, is the other person okay? Do they seem all right? Do they need anything? Can I help in any way? And we don't have to be conversing. We don't have to be necessarily, there's a place for sharing, but we don't have to be speaking all the time about how we are, but we can pick up so much if we're willing to just patiently, quietly, subtly observe the others that we live with. And every 5 days, he goes on to say, we sit together for the whole night and discuss the teachings. So this is quite interesting. Every 5 days, I don't know the significance of the 5 days, but the lunar calendar is kind of divided into 15 and then 14 days between new moons and full moons. So it's kind of, it strikes me that it's perhaps about 3 times in every lunar cycle, or 6 times in every lunar cycle, that they meet together and spend the whole night talking. So that's quite fascinating, because it's like going from complete silence and solitude, although together yet in solitude, to this talking marathon. So how interesting is that? And it gives me the impression, it reminds me actually of when I was in a Christian monastery, and they had a wonderful schedule with a lot of silence. But once a day there was a kind of social session. It wasn't enforced, but it was like part of the schedule was that you would meet and talk, and you sort of had to make some conversation as a practice. And I found it quite interesting when I was there to discover that quite often there was a lot to be said, and this sense of a limited amount of time. One could just see how, the expressiveness through speech would just sort of well up like a fountain. We'd be talking, and then the bell would go and it would just stop. And so it was a fascinating practice, and makes me think of that we can actually decide. We can be the master of our mouth, if you like. We can decide when speech is skillful and when it isn't, and to have that degree of mastery, and yet when there is the opportunity to speak, to let it flow. And of course they were speaking on Dharma, and probably, I don't know, they're all said to be arahants, but one would imagine there would be a lot of inspiration and mutual appreciation of the Dharma together. So he finishes, that's how we live. Keenly, diligently keen and resolute. And the Buddha says, good, Aniruddha and friends. And then he's going to go on to discuss practice with them. And this is where we hear about the Buddha's own experiences with meditation before he became enlightened. But I'll just pause here for a moment or two to see if there's any thoughts, reflections, questions, comments on this first part or middle part of the sutta. Okay, let's continue. So the Buddha says to them, "But as you live diligently like this, have you achieved any superhuman distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones, a meditation at ease?" And Anuruddha said, "Well, sir, while meditating, diligent, keen, and resolute, we perceive both light and vision of forms. But before long, the light and the vision of forms vanish. We haven't worked out the reason for that." So what strikes me as interesting, first of all, is that he's talking for all three of them. So it's like all three of them have the same experience in their meditation. So that's quite interesting. And what's he describing? Light and vision of forms. It makes me think of nimitta, that they're practicing samadhi, they're getting very concentrated, and the mind is becoming perhaps one-pointed. And vision of forms gives the impression of more of a sort of multiplicity of experience, perhaps a deep kind of insight practice, or you could call vipassana. So to me, he's almost sort of describing a refinement of the samadhi and of the panya, or samadhi and vipassana. Is there anything in Bhikkhu Bodhi about that, about this passage? I just think there's a footnote that could be of interest at this point.
Which footnote is that?
I'm not sure. Let me see. Light and vision.
1189.
Yeah.
Here, I can read it off.
1189. Thank you.
It is here that the present sutta continues differently from Majjhima 31. That's a similar one. A commentator explains that light as the preliminary light, which another commentary glosses as the light produced by access to jhana. The commentator adds that one who gains the fourth jhana develops the light kasina as the preliminary to arousing the divine eye. The vision of forms, dasana rupanam, is seeing of forms with the divine eye. Venerable Anuruddha was later declared by the Buddha to be the foremost disciple in the exercise of the divine eye. So that means seeing something far away, or seeing something like on the other side of the mountain, seeing a person far away who's almost ready to become awakened if they only could hear the right teaching, something like that.
Thank you so much, Ayya. So, and interesting again that Anuruddha has this, he's acknowledged as one with great psychic powers, but it was seen that Nandiya and Kimbala also have the same kind of mind, and a mind that focuses, and they're practicing the jhana, there's one-pointedness, and they're developing special powers, the psychic powers. But they're saying, or Anuruddha's saying for them that something's happening whereby this experience keeps falling away. They keep coming out of it, and they haven't figured out why that would be. And so the Buddha says, well, you should work out the reason for that. And he then goes on, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened, but intent on awakening, I too perceived both light and vision of forms. But before long, my light and vision of forms vanished. It occurred to me, what is the cause? What is the reason why my light and vision of forms vanish? So the very same experience. It occurred to me, doubt arose in me, and because of that, my immersion fell away. When immersion falls away, the light and vision of forms vanish. I'll make sure that doubt will not arise in me again. So we can just take a little pause here. So he is describing the mind that's immersed, that's focused, concentrated in samadhi, and enters into the jhana, or there's an emitter in the mind, there's light, there's complete focus on that. There's nothing else exists for that person. And then something gets in the way. And the Buddha was able to actually discern what it was. And when he says, doubt arose in me, I wonder if we could imagine what that would actually mean, what that experience would be. It wouldn't be the word doubt flashing, or, what would it be like to experience doubt coming into the mind? And I wonder if anyone has any suggestions about that from our own experience. So this is the hindrance, one of the 5 hindrances, Vicikiccha. Do you know that one? I know that one very well.
Do you know it? Do you have an answer?
How do you experience it? Like, give us an example, anyone?
If somebody, if you'd like to come over here, then they can see you.
You don't know.
Or they can hear you if you would come over here and speak.
I'm still thinking about it.
Okay, it's fine. I don't want to put anyone on the spot.
Yeah.
I just want to give some examples, to kind of make it more accessible to us. So the kind of doubt about, should I be practicing in this way? Or should I maybe do something else, for instance? Or
it could be a kind of a curiosity, like what's happening to me?
yeah.
And then one becomes distracted by trying to analyze the experience instead of simply staying with the experience. Or it could be a doubt about one's own ability, or one's own worthiness to be successful.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really helpful. So the Buddha recognized doubt when doubt arose. That which just distracted him from his object of meditation. But realizing what had happened, perhaps is the key, just to know, to notice, and to have the mindfulness to see that movement away from the object, movement away from the focus of meditation. Then the mind can return. So it's catching ourselves. And the Buddha was able to do that. So he's telling them, this is one possible source of the problem for you. And then he said to himself, I'll make sure that doubt will not arise again. And that speaks to me of, a bit like you were talking about this morning, Ayya, adhitthana, kind of determination. When this arises, I'm going to be diligent, and I'm not going to allow it to throw me off course. So he had the ability, had the determination, had the strength of mind to uproot that defilement. And then it occurred to me, again, while meditating, diligent, keen, and resolute, perceiving both light and vision of forms, before long, my light and vision of forms vanished. It occurred to me, what's the cause? What's the reason why the light and vision of forms vanished? And it occurred to me, loss of focus arose in me. And because of that, my immersion fell away. So on this other occasion, this next occasion, it's a different cause, different reason, loss of focus. Do we know that one? I could give many examples. So starting to think about something, thoughts arising into the mind and getting caught up in those thoughts. You mentioned the shopping list this morning. 1,001 possibilities, more than 1,001. Many, many, many possibilities. Loss of focus. Anything else apart from thinking?
What they call the sunken mind. It's just, you're not distracted, but you're also not aware.
Yeah.
Mental fog.
Mental fog. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Sort of semi-dream state, but a little bit going into also sleepiness and mind full of fog, full of mist, full of just not as focused, like the lute that's too loosely strung. So while meditating, dullness and drowsiness arose in me, he goes on to say. So this is very closely linked to what we've just been saying. Another of the 5 hindrances, tina mida, sloth and torpor. So again, he goes on to say that he was able to notice this arising, and in his awareness of this hindrance, he could work with it and find his way to overcoming this obstacle. And again, while meditating, terror arose in me. And because of that, my immersion fell away. When immersion falls away, the light and vision of forms vanishes. Suppose a person was traveling along a road and killers were to spring out at them from both sides. They'd feel terrified because of that. In the same way, terror arose in me. So I don't know if anyone's experienced this kind of obstacle in their practice. Has anyone got any experience of that? Really, not just fear, or you could say extreme fear. I have. And I think it's something that can come for people. I don't know. I mean, maybe I think of 2 reasons. One is that sometimes terrifying visions and thoughts can arise out of nowhere, seemingly. A bit like having a nightmare, but you're awake and something can come into the mind. That could happen. But the other thing is when the mind becomes very focused, there can be an actual fear of that, of the results of that practice. So the degree of sort of stillness and peace and tranquility can actually perhaps bring up some deep lying or otherwise invisible mental defilements that can come up on the surface. I don't know, but I do know that I've heard many times that people can sometimes just feel this terror, this fear, and want to stop. It's as if you don't want to go on because you don't want to lose your sense of perhaps who you are or your understanding of the way things are, because there's a realization that if I continue practicing, I'm going to have to really, this mind is going to really transform. And I'm not ready for that. And I even know someone who was ordained who had a very, a mind that focused very well. And he experienced jhana, and he got to a point in his practice where he experienced so much fear and terror that he actually disrobed and left the monastery and went back to lay life because he couldn't face that, the strength of that terror. And quite mysterious, but it happens. So this experience that the Buddha describes, I think it's very helpful for us, because if we do find that at any time fear arises, we can take heart, because the Buddha he was there too. He had the same experience and he was able to overcome it. And I'm quite sure, actually, that that any fear that arises in our practice is always like a doorway. It's like something's opening up, and it can feel very frightening, a bit like falling off a cliff or going into a very dark place, because we don't know it. Or it can be like being in free fall, and there's absolutely nothing that's familiar anymore. And there's no sense of control left. That's a very good thing for the mind to get to that place. So when the fear comes, I often think myself nowadays, this is a really good moment. This is really valuable. Oh, this is worth staying with, because I know it's going to take me into some uncharted territory where, it's a whole new world again. And as the mind opens up on the path, again and again, we can experience this feeling of the unknown and the fear that goes with that. But it's a wholly good thing. And just that knowledge is enough to help us to stay steady. So the Buddha also experienced terror.
Excuse me, Ayya.
Yes.
We see here a kind of a very instantaneous feedback loop by which a person could discern which mental factors are a hindrance to the meditation, because you lose the nimitta, or you fall out of immersion. Sometimes, if you were not using that as your barometer, you wouldn't necessarily know which mental factors to allow and which ones to drop. The example I have is a person who in the past experienced mental illness secondary to drug abuse. And the jhana experience is an altered state of consciousness, which might seem like sort of like being high on drugs. And then that person had a very strong learned response not to go there for safety, for personal safety. So they had learned, just cut that off, don't go there.
Yeah.
Danger, danger, stay away. And so then they can't have jhana. So then elsewhere, our teachers tell us that jhana is actually safe. It's really safe. It's totally safe. You will not expect to become mentally ill because of jhana. But they need the confidence and possibly some guidance as to the the safety in order to trust that they have a good barometer that's telling them whether they're staying on the track or falling off the track.
Yeah.
And then to know, I can trust this barometer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very helpful because, yeah, I mean, there are very good teachings on jhana practice nowadays, but that wasn't always the case.
Yeah.
And without having experienced guidance, it can be very difficult to chart that course.
Right.
And yeah, and that kind of past experience.
Right.
Yeah, many different kinds of obstacles to freedom. It's amazing that the mind will throw up from our past. Yeah. So back to the Buddha and this wonderful series of, or list of the obstacles to not just jhana practice, but to our meditation. And next we have, while meditating, excitement arose in me. And because of that, my immersion fell away. The light and vision of forms vanished. And he gives another simile here for excitement. Suppose a person was looking for an entrance to a hidden treasure, and all at once they'd come across 5 entrances. They'd feel excited because of that. In the same way, excitement arose in me. So, well, has anybody experienced excitement arising in meditation? So you have? Okay. Is there anything you could share about that, or?
It's right when I fall off. Yeah, whenever. Oh, okay. Oh. It's just,
Right,
yeah.
right. So whatever it is you're experiencing, you have a sort of a feeling of a thrill about it, or would that be? And then it falls away. So Anagarika Panyatara describing very beautifully how this can happen. There's a kind of, yes, a thrill of a certain degree of peace, would it be? Or a certain degree of pleasant feeling?
yeah.
Yeah.
Pleasant feeling with background of peace. And then the mind wants more of that. And then gets excited because it wants more. And then the instant that it does that, it falls away.
Right. So Anagarika Panyatara describes this experience of, it's like a very pleasant background, a feeling of peace, or the other way around, a very peaceful background and a feeling of delight or pleasure, and the mind just jumping for joy, and then, boom, it's gone. Yeah. Do you know that? Have you experienced that? Yeah, me too. Just getting a little bit, it's like a little bit like a slightly grasping, slightly wanting more. You said, Anagarika Panyatara said, wanting more, that arises. Yeah, it feels like a very delicate process, isn't it? With pleasant feeling to notice that, leaning towards it, and to keep noticing and letting go, letting go, letting go. It's really quite delicate, quite a delicate, mind state to have to deal with. And the Buddha mentions the 5 entrances. Looking for a hidden treasure, there's not just one way, but there are 5 ways. And I think here he's referring to the first 4 jhana or 5 jhana. The first 4 jhana can be split into 5. The second jhana can be split into 2. And I think that's what he's referring to. So these are where the mind is, I mean, you probably all know, but I'll just briefly say that it's where the mind is very focused and we experience a degree of well-being and even bliss and even profound peace, but we're still actually, the 5 senses, the 6 senses even, are still operating. They're the jhanas where there's still a sense of a body. So we're anchored, if you like, in the body. There are other jhana that are disembodied. They're mental states only, where all the senses have really shut down. So the Buddha is very specifically describing just these first 4 jhana or 5 jhana, where there's still body awareness. And these are the 5 entrances to bliss, to really profound well-being. So he goes on. I'll make sure that neither doubt nor loss of focus, nor dullness and drowsiness, nor terror, nor excitement will arise in me again. And then while meditating, discomfort arose in me. Discomfort, I mean, that seems like after talking about excitement, it's like, well, yeah, of course. I think we all know discomfort. So I think of physical discomfort, but then there's also mental discomfort. We can make lists, couldn't we, of all the different kinds of mental discomfort that we can experience. So does that feel familiar to everyone? So there we are. The Buddha also, and this is actually, he's describing, and later he tells us the night of his enlightenment. He's still experiencing all these things. I find that kind of comforting or kind of encouraging. So discomfort arose and he dealt with it in the same way. He recognized it and he worked with it and he saw to the end of it. And then while meditating, excessive energy arose in me. And because of that, my immersion fell away. And here he gives a simile again. For excessive energy, suppose a person was to grip a quail too tightly in their hands, it would die right there. So it's like you throttle your experience to death. So again, it speaks to me of grasping, of holding on, literally holding on. And any trace of desire or attachment that arises in the mind, and we're back to square one, it can feel like. It's not really back to square one, is it? But it can feel like total defeat. And the Buddha experienced this and worked with it and overcame it. And then while meditating, overly lax energy arose in me. And because of that, my immersion fell away. Suppose a person was to grip a quail too loosely, it would fly out of their hands in the same way. So these two similes, these two descriptions, he's really speaking about right effort, and that's a very fine tuning, I think, for all of us I mean, I think Ayya Sobhana, you were touching on this for me this morning. It reminds me of what you were saying this morning about how there's a time for metta practice, for really being very welcoming and compassionate towards our experience. And then there's a time for bringing up the adhitthana, the determination, being quite firm with the mind. And it was a really beautiful guided meditation where we were exploring that in the meditation. And one could say that there's similarity here, because this is really about how much energy to put into the practice. And it reminds me of the simile in the Samyutta Nikaya. Somebody was asking, a Deva was asking the Buddha how to practice. How hard should I try, or should I relax? And the Buddha gave the simile of crossing the river. And he said, if you're trying to cross a river and you go too slowly, then you'll get swept away. You'll lose your energy, you'll get cold, and you won't get across. But at the same time, if you try and push your way across and you're really struggling to get there quickly, you'll exhaust yourself and you'll also get swept away. So it's just this degree of how to pace oneself you know, how to, fine tune the energy. And I think for me, this is it's a constant reflection and work in progress. Yeah, like tuning an instrument, constant adjustments required to keep it in tune. So the Buddha dealt with this, lax energy, too tight energy, and saw his way through these obstacles. And then again, while meditating, there's more. Longing arose in me. Longing arose in me. Can you relate to that? Longing. To me, this can be either mundane or it can be a spiritual longing. Could divide it, that way. So just longing for an ice cream or longing to go to, lie down and have a sleep, kind of longing.
For monastics, a big danger is nostalgia. We can remember when we were not monastics, when we were kids or when we were in college or something like that, all the fun that we had. And that becomes a danger.
Right, reminiscing. Yeah. What's the word? Being sentimental recollections.
Right.
Yeah. So all sorts of possibilities there for us to be thrown off track. And also the spiritual longing. I mean, the longing to be free, to see the goal, to attain nirvana. That can be a really serious obstacle for people who devote their lives to practice. And you feel after 20 years or 30 years, I still haven't managed to break through. And that longing can be a real challenge. So it can be a very wholesome longing. And in the case of the Buddha, I'm sure it was. I'm speculating, but I imagine it would have been that kind of a longing for him to all these years that I've been striving. He was doing these ascetic practices, wasn't he, for 6 years and torturing himself in every possible way and no result, no attainment. And then he's trying to work with his mind and trying to practice in this more peaceful and wholesome way. And still, there's a period of time when he still hasn't attained the goal. So longing was something that he experienced. Okay, and then while meditating, perceptions of diversity arose in me. Perceptions of diversity. Is there a footnote for that?
Yes. The commentator says, when perception of diversity arose, I thought I would attend to one type of form, whether agreeable or disagreeable. As I did so, excessive meditation upon forms arose in me.
That's interesting, isn't it? Holding to some image.
The previous one is commented, while attending to a single type of form, longing arose, thinking I will attend to different kinds of form. I directed my attention towards the heavenly world, towards the human world, and so on, to different realms. So these two, the perception of diversity and the longing are connected. To thinking about different realms of existence. So if you are aiming for existence, that's one of the basic types of craving.
Yes. It brings to mind the 10 fetters and how, as we develop in our practice, we almost like have to experience all these higher realms of existence and how pleasant it would be to dwell in these heavenly realms. But that's not the goal. And also the experience of jhana itself, the bliss of jhana, we can get caught up in that, so that we just want to keep practicing in that way. And the Buddha used the jhana, the focused mind, as a tool or a really fine-tuned way of gaining insight. And so the peaceful abidings in the jhana in and of themselves are not liberating, but it's very easy to get enamored of these states of mind that are so peaceful, restful, like having a lovely holiday. Why do the hard work when you can have a great holiday? If you have the ability to focus the mind in that way. So that kind of danger, that's really more about the longing. I mean, that's another example of longing. But the perception of the where am I? Perceptions of diversity. Ayya, you're pointing to the mind that goes into all the different possible states of bliss and joy and well-being. Yeah. So the Buddha dealt with that, worked with that.
You know, it could also have to do with the sense bases. You know, with the sixfold sense bases, it's like within meditation, sometimes it's like as if the body is like a beehive. There's so many different things happening in the body. You can almost feel the tingling and the buzzing of, you know, the blood flowing and the nervous system, you know, clicking away, and the things are happening in the brain, and things are registering in the eye, and so many different phenomena are happening in the body. And because of being concentrated, then the awareness becomes so much the stronger. So then if you let go of the meditation in order to explore all these fascinating diversity of what's arising from the body.
Yeah, right. It's like the increased awareness that you can experience can become enticing and something to be attached to also.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So next, there's more. The next thing that occurred to the Buddha, or the next thing that he experienced as an obstacle, was excessive concentration on forms. So it's kind of, it must be something different from the things that he said before, but they're all very connected, aren't they? Because that kind of sense of too much effort, too much focus, zoning in on something, honing in on something, and maybe getting a bit lost in that. Anything to say on that, Ayya? Excessive concentration on forms.
Oops.
I know sometimes in meditation, when people are really trying to develop their samadhi practice, there can be a real tension. You know, sort of like you find yourself frowning and kind of leaning forwards and like maybe gritting your teeth and getting a headache. Sometimes people say, I can't meditate because it just gives me a big headache. And so there's a sense of maybe we can be aware of that tendency to overstrain ourselves, and the need to remember to relax, sit back, chill, enjoy, and again, not strive too hard.
Yeah, that comment doesn't have footnote, doesn't have very much.
I mean, it's very similar, isn't it, to too much effort, too much energy, too much enthusiasm. But this is a slight variation, which is too much focus, too much push in that mind that wants to become one-pointed, or that is one-pointed. Yeah.
I have a
question.
Yeah.
How do you find the balance between that strive and also that surrendering? Because I notice myself sometimes like really trying to focus, and sometimes I will get
Yeah. So Jen's asking, how do you get the right balance between making an effort, striving, and sort of relaxing and just letting things be? Anything like that?
That's where the barometer is what helps you. Because if you go too far this way or too far that way, you fall out of the meditation. So if you're able to be fortunate enough to be able to gain some concentration and to feel either being just in the groove of having a meditation which is not disturbed and not falling off in any direction, then that's what guides you on when you're going off track. If it starts to wobble a little bit, sometimes you get a little wobble and then you can come back without falling off.
Thank you. Yeah. It is this, constant sort of balancing act, which keeps us on our toes. I mean, it makes the meditation very interesting and very alive, doesn't it? So thank you. So the Buddha went on to say, so we've actually come to the end of the list of all the different obstacles that the Buddha himself experienced in his meditation. And how heartening is that, I feel, it's like speaking with a teacher or a friend. It's like being able to share experience and to feel that I'm not the only one who's struggling with this. So the Buddha went on to say, when I understand that doubt is a corruption of the mind, I gave it up. When I understood that loss of focus, dullness and drowsiness, terror, excitement, discomfort, excessive energy, overly lax energy, longing, perception of diversity, and excessive concentration on forms are all corruptions of the mind. I gave them up.
There's a footnote here.
Yeah.
It's referring to the Pali expression. When I understood that doubt, in this case it says a corruption of the mind or an imperfection of the mind, Vicikicca chittasa Upakkilesasutta. So that I recognized the Vicikicca means doubt as being an Upakkilesa or a corruption of the chitta, of the mind. So in this case, chitta, we're doing chittanupassana for this vasa as one of our exercises. And in this case, the chitta is referring to the development of samadhi. So the chitta is something to be developed. It's not just a general reference to mentality, which has different kind of states in it, but instead to develop the chitta is to clear it of these imperfections.
Thank you. Yeah. The Buddha said, basically, he was able to give up all of these upakkilesa, all of these imperfections. And that's the journey. We're all on that journey. He said, while meditating diligent, keen, and resolute, I perceived light, but did not see forms. Or I saw forms, but did not see light. And this went on for a whole night, a whole day, even a whole night and day. So he saw forms, but did not see light. He saw light, but did not see forms. To me, that speaks of his mind was sometimes very focused in jhana or with a nimitta, and he could continue to practice like that for 12 hours, 24 hours longer. And the same for perceiving forms. which was described in the footnote as seeing with a divine eye, is one way of interpreting that. And he could sustain these practices for long periods of time. I thought, what is the cause? What is the reason for this? It occurred to me, when I don't focus on the foundation of the forms, but focus on the foundation of the light, then I perceive light and do not see forms. When I don't focus on the foundation of light, but focus on the foundation of forms, then I see forms and don't perceive light. And this goes on for a whole day and night, a whole night and day. So he could choose how to focus his mind, what his meditation object would be, and he could stay with that without any kind of disturbance at all. Or I perceived limitless light and saw limitless forms. And this went on for a whole day, a whole night, or a day and night. And it occurred to me, with limited vision, I perceive limited light and see limited forms. But when my immersion is limitless, then my vision is limitless. And with limitless vision, I perceive limitless light and see limitless forms, which goes on for these periods of time. So he could, again, he could choose whether to have a completely open, limitless perception, or whether to have a limited perception. We talked the other day in the sutta before this sutta about the ability to focus on one thing, like a root of a tree, and then you can broaden your vision to encompass the whole world. It's a choice. But I think the crucial thing here is that the Buddha's pointing to the fact that he could do this at will, and there was no obstacle to his choice of how he was going to spend his time, how the mind was going to be, how he was going to practice. So he had this incredible, at this stage, mastery of the mind, having overcome all these obstacles that he's described. When I understood that doubt, loss of focus, dullness and drowsiness, terror, excitement, discomfort, excessive energy, overly lax energy, longing, perception of diversity, and excessive concentration on forms are corruptions of the mind, I gave them up. Sounds kind of easy. It's great. I gave them up. May we also find ourselves in the position where we can say the same thing. But it's interesting just to take in this list again and again. I think we can really contemplate these different states of mind, because knowing is everything. It's like if we know, if we can put a label, if you like, if we can pigeonhole what's going on, we're very close to overcoming it. So dukkha is to be understood. So I think this is for me, the most important thing the Buddha's pointing to is just that he was able to notice and understand what was happening. And we can do the same thing, surely. So I thought, he said, I've given up my mental corruptions. Now let me develop immersion in 3 ways. I developed immersion while placing the mind and keeping it connected, without placing the mind, but just keeping it connected, without placing the mind or keeping it connected, with rapture, without rapture, with pleasure, with equanimity. So what he's describing here, and sadly, we're running out of time, so just briefly to say that what he's describing here is again, the first 4 jhanas or 5 jhanas. So he's describing, he could decide where he would place his mind, in which jhana, and the jhanas have these qualities. So in the first jhana, there's a movement of the mind towards the object, and it hits on the object. There's that relationship between mind and object. In the second jhana, when we talk about 5 jhanas, the mind is actually fixed on the object, or circling very closely around that object. So it's really focused right in, and one can observe that. And in the third jhana, in this scheme, there is rapture, there is bliss, piti. And in the fourth of the 5 jhanas, there's sukha, there's happiness, which is a more, a less enthusiastic or a less excited form of bliss. It's sort of a more of a contentment, a resting in peace. And then in the fifth, or in the fourth, what's normally known as the 4th jhana, but in this case, in the 5th jhana, there is equanimity. There's this abiding in peace, where even pleasure and happiness and mental well-being is no longer an issue. There's just peace, like the stillness of the ocean. And so he's saying that, really here, he's saying that he could practice these 5 jhana at will, and he can choose which one to enter into, and also for how long, as he said before. When I developed immersion in these ways, the knowledge and vision arose in me. My freedom is unshakable. This is my last rebirth. Now there are no more future lives. So this sutta, for me, is really powerful, because this is the Buddha's really detailed description of this night when he sat under the Bodhi tree, and he, in other places, we're told he had this battle with Mara. Mara came to attack him with his armies, and the terror that he describes here, and the longing that he describes, and all these different issues with energy, how much he was striving and how much he was needing to stand back and just let things unfold. All of that is described really for us in this sutta. So for me, it's really most inspiring and very powerful, because it's the only place where he really goes into this kind of detail. And his breakthrough happened because he was able to work with all the obstructions, all the kilesa, and see them through to the end. And the way he puts it is significant to me. He gave them up. It's not like they fell away or they changed. He gave them up. So I think that's interesting, just for contemplation. And how do we give things up? And what does that feel like? And what's the result? And do we notice the result as he noticed the result? So in the end, he knew through his cultivation of these states of meditation, he could scour, he could he could examine, he could search through the mind and see, when he reached the point where there was nothing left that was an obstruction, that was a source of ignorance, that was a source of suffering, that was a root cause for craving, or a root cause for aversion or confusion. And he could look around and see there was nothing left to work with. There was nothing more to be done. My freedom is unshakable. This is my last rebirth. And now there are no more future lives. It's done. Wonderful. I mean, I think it's really interesting that that was his expression of liberation. There's no more future lives. There's no more future. That's very interesting. That's the expression of freedom. So I would take that away and contemplate that as well. There's no more future lives. This is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, Venerable Anuruddha was happy with what the Buddha had said. Ewan.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu.
sadhu.
And it just happens to be a little bit, we have a few more minutes. Should we just
Yes.
sit quietly together? Or does anyone want to, I haven't given a lot of space for people to come in lately. So if anyone has any comments or questions or reflections, you're very welcome. And otherwise we can just sit quietly. We've got 5 minutes to sit together and just to digest this wonderful sutta.
Okay.
I'll ring the gong at 2:30.
Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. Suakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghan Namami. Okay, thank you for your patient listening, everyone.